Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Eileen, Andrea, Gwen, Karen, Valerie, Rob, Liam, and Abby. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, collections, and full book recordings found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip. No subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's conclude our reading of a most interesting work, Symmes' theory of concentric spheres, demonstrating that the Earth is hollow, habitable within, and widely open about the poles, by a citizen of the United States. Printed and published in 1826 by Morgan, Lodge and Fisher, Cincinnati, Ohio. Let's pick up right where we left off at the beginning of Chapter 8. Let's begin. Chapter 8. General Observations on the Theory of Concentric Spheres, with a few suggestions to the Congress of the United States to authorize and fit out an expedition for the discovery of the interior regions, or at least to explore the northern parts of the continent of America. Of the many various and conflicting theories which have been advanced relative to the form, structure, and motion of the Earth, the theory of concentric spheres deserves to rank as one of the most important, for should it hereafter be found correct, the advantages resulting to the civilized and learned world must cause it to stand preeminent among the improvements in philosophy. The habitable superficies of our sphere would not only be nearly doubled, but the different spheres of which our Earth is probably constituted might increase the habitable surface tenfold. That such may be the construction of the Earth, every law of matter with which I am acquainted seems to admit, at least of the possibility. The different appearances of the other planets render it probable, and the various concurring terrestrial facts existing in the Arctic regions, to my mind, render such a conclusion almost certain. And further, that matter and space are never uselessly wasted is an axiom, not only of sound philosophy, but of natural religion and of common sense. Many of the theories which have been advanced respecting the Earth are vague and uncertain, and will remain so forever, being predicated on deductions drawn from certain premises that can never be established with certainty. Consequently, they must rest wholly on the strength of the arguments drawn from the premises, as they are not susceptible of being demonstrated by experiment. Not so with the theory of concentric spheres. Its correctness admits of ocular demonstration. The interior of the sphere is declared accessible, and the whole extent capable of being accurately explored, thereby establishing the theory or disproving and putting it at rest forever. The celebrated Dr. Halley, in the year 1692, in his attempt to account for the change of the variation of the magnetic needle, advanced a novel hypothesis as respects the internal structure of the earth. He supposes that there is an interior globe, separated from the external sphere by a fluid medium, or that there may be several internal spheres, separated from each other by atmospheres, and that the concave arches may in several places shine with a substance similar to that which invests the body of the sun, producing light and heat for the accommodation of those internal regions which he alleges may possibly be inhabited by animate beings. However, he suggests no idea of polar openings, nor of any communication from the outer surface to those interior regions. Consequently, their existence must have remained forever a matter of mere conjecture. We find that Dr. Halley, in the wisdom of his philosophy, believed those internal regions to be lighted, though situated many thousand fathoms beneath the surface, and without any aperture to communicate light from without. Why not then believe that the interior of the spheres, according to Symmes's theory, may be lighted when he lays down such vast openings at either pole for that purpose? Euler was also an advocate for the theory of Dr. Halley. He believed with him that the earth is hollow, with a ball or nucleus included in the center. He, however, differed from Halley as to the nature of the nucleus. Halley believed it to be constituted of the same materials of the exterior crust of the earth. Euler believed it to be a luminous body formed of materials similar to the sun, and adapted to the purpose of illuminating and warming the interior surface of the crust, which he supposed might be inhabited equally with the interior surface. He fancied that this luminous ball had no rotary motion, and that the outer shell revolved around it. However, neither he nor Dr. Halley left any opening by which the internal regions could be explored. Their existence was therefore left to rest on vague hypothesis. These different theories, however extravagant they may appear to us, were believed and supported by those men whom we must acknowledge were among the most learned of the age in which they lived, and among the mathematicians in Europe they have yet some warm supporters. Why not then give Symmes's theory of open poles and concentric spheres a serious investigation, the correctness of which is so much more probable, and the demonstration of its truth or falsehood so much more practicable? At all events, a voyage to the polar regions, with an eye to the accomplishment of Symmes's purpose, might be productive of incalculable advantages to the cause of science in general. With respect to astronomy and geography, it would afford many new lights, and perhaps discover and establish many new principles not thought of at this day. Knowledge is power, and so far as an individual acquires a knowledge of literature and science above his contemporaries, so far does he possess a power and influence over those among whom he resides. So does a nation when she becomes characterized, for the acquisition of knowledge in the sciences and the arts. Those nations which have made great and important advances in the improvement of science or in new discoveries have acquired a preeminence of character and standing among other nations of the world. The United States of America, having assumed a respectable station among the nations, is fast advancing in wealth and power. Her territories are stretched over a vast extent of country, and her population is increasing with a rapidity unprecedented. We are already looked up to by other nations as a people of very considerable importance, and as having made a successful experiment in politics and government, which politicians had before considered impracticable. Ought we not then, as a nation, paying some attention to the progress of science and knowledge, to hold out inducements for the progressive improvements and useful discoveries of our own citizens? While the English, the Russians, and the French are making great exertions for the purpose of discovery and the advancement of science, will America remain idle and inactive? Will she adopt the unwise policy that individual enterprise ought to be let alone? Other nations act differently, and they have long been directing their researches towards the acquisition of a more perfect knowledge of our globe, and such exertions have always been considered as the most glorious actions on record in the annals of their history. By so doing, they have not only been amply rewarded themselves, but have benefited the world at large by the acquisition of important information respecting the before unknown parts of it, and by the improvement of science. Will America then sit by inactive and contented while she is surrounded with plenty and enjoying a situation most enviable in the career of nations? Let us rather encourage than shackle the genius and enterprising spirit of our own citizens, and not act like an avaricious miser who directs all his thoughts to the calculation of dollars and cents. Had this let-alone policy been pursued by the nations that have sent out ships of discovery, what would have been the situation of the world at the present day? Bounds would have been set to the great field of philosophy, and the arts and sciences must have flourished only within a circumscribed sphere. In vain might the revolving planets have forced upon the minds of mankind their beautiful order, motions, and attractions. The extensive continent of America must yet have remained a gloomy wilderness. If we take a retrospective view of the world for some centuries back, we shall find the knowledge of the most scientific nations bounded by a circumference of 2,000 or 3,000 miles. At length a few enterprising individuals, aided by their governments, made extensive discoveries. A Columbus discovered the vast continent of America, and subsequent navigators discovered the extensive countries of New Holland, New Zealand, and numerous islands in the Pacific Ocean and South Sea. All of these now disclose to us that what was formerly believed to constitute the whole habitable world is but a spot, one little corner in the parts known at this day. Even yet, a vast portion of our globe remains unexplored. Why then should we contribute nothing towards the attainment of the grand pursuit of nations, we who are destined, I hope, one day to stand as the first nation under the sun? Why should we fold our arms and sit inactive while that little spot, Great Britain, is making such efforts to explore those regions? It would not be an unwise policy for the American government to foster and encourage such noble workings of genius. It can in no way be inconsistent with the present policy of our government that an expedition should be fitted out to explore the polar regions. But on the contrary, it would bespeak a spirit of liberality and a desire to promote scientific enterprise. It is neither against the Constitution nor laws of our country. We are now at peace with the world. Taxes are comparatively trifling. The situation of our country at present affords a most favorable opportunity for the accomplishment of the undertaking. It is one of such importance, too, as will justify the use of money and men, while the honor of the discovery of a new world would be its reward. I apprehend that we only lack confidence in our own abilities to perfect and explain many things not dreamed of by the ancient philosophers. We are inclined rather to undervalue our own efforts, and like our former opinions on manufacturing subjects, think we can never appear to advantage unless dressed in a coat of foreign manufacture. It appears to savor of the doctrine that no new opinion or proposition can merit attention or be adopted unless it come from a European source. Had the proposition of concentric spheres or a hollow globe been made by an English or French philosopher instead of a native of the United States, I very much question whether so large a share of ridicule would have been attached to its author and adherents. It may be replied that the idea of a world within a world is absurd. But who can assert with confidence that this idea is, in reality, nothing more than the imagination of a feverish brain? How is it shown that such a form does not exist? Are there not as strong reasons for believing that the earth is constituted of concentric spheres as the court of Spain or any man in Europe had to believe that there was an undiscovered continent? Has not Captain Symmes theoretically proven his assertions of concentric spheres and open poles, and embodied a catalogue of facts, numerous and plausible, in support of his opinions? And who has confuted his assertions? I dare to say that none can be found who can fully disprove them, and account for the facts which he adduces as the proofs of his theory. If it can be shown that Symmes's theory is probable, or has the least plausibility attached to it, nay, that it is even possible, why not afford him the means of testing its correctness? The bare possibility of such a discovery ought to be a sufficient stimulus to call forth the patronage of any government. And should the theory prove correct, and the adventure succeed, would it not immortalize our nation? The fame of Symmes and his native country would only expire with time. But even should the expedition fail in the main object, there would still be neither loss nor disgrace. If the interior world have no existence but in Captain Symmes's imagination, would it be a matter worthy of no consideration to explore the northern parts of our own hemisphere? In the attempt, we might discover something of great importance. In chasing a phantom, we might hit on a reality. In searching for the unknowable, discover what has hitherto been unknown. Some new islands, some undiscovered sea, some northwest by west passage or inlet, some new phenomenon of nature, some hitherto unknown inhabitants of the polar regions, nay, even the pole itself. And would it be a matter of no consequence that a citizen of our own country should first stand on the axis and plant the stars and stripes of our own country beneath the polar star? And should this be effected, will not the glory and honor our nation would acquire thereby be worth the expenditure? No one, I hope, will say that it would not be worth it all 10 times told. But in case this should fail, would it be a matter of no consequence to explore the northern parts of our own continent and fill up the blank on the map of the northern hemisphere? This, in my humble opinion, is far from being impracticable. A steam vessel might run from the mouth of the Oregon River and proceed along the northwest coast of America through Bering's Straits round to the Atlantic, or if impeded by ice, a party might pursue their journey on foot with sledges on the ice and along the coast quite round to Hudson's Bay. The accomplishment of this I deem no chimera. The writer of this, for one, and he has no doubt Captain Symmes and a sufficient number of others, would volunteer to accomplish the enterprise. And should such an expedition be authorized and fitted out by the government, rest assured, if they did not penetrate the interior of our sphere, or plant the American standard beneath the great northern bear, they would at least furnish a correct map of the coast of America, from the mouth of Oregon round to Fort Churchill, or make the snows of the north their winding sheets. Within a few years, several expeditions have been fitted out for the purpose of discovery by different nations in Europe, and particularly by the English. Ross and Parry have visited the Arctic regions, and Parry now is on his 3rd voyage, as though there were some hidden mystery there, which the English government is anxious to develop. It is not likely that they would have fitted out and dispatched 4 successive expeditions merely to view icebergs and Eskimo Indians. As for the discovery of a northwest passage to the East Indies, it cannot be their sole object, as the continent of America has been explored by land to 72 degrees of north latitude, and according to the old theory, beyond that latitude, the seas are so encumbered with ice as to render their navigation extremely difficult, if not impracticable, from which I am induced to believe that they have discovered something in those regions which indicates a state of things different from that heretofore believed to exist. Under the protection of the Russian government, Kotzebue and Baron Wrangel have been engaged in similar enterprises, and although these different attempts have afforded considerable light on the subject, yet they are rather calculated to awaken than satisfy curiosity. Many of the facts, however, which are urged as proof of the theory of concentric spheres, have been confirmed or corroborated by the personal observations of those skillful navigators. But so long as they lack confidence in the theory, it can scarcely be expected they will make the discovery. The winding meridians which they will pursue, when intending to proceed straight forward, will keep them bewildered among the ice, along the circle of the verge, or finally bring them out towards the exterior surface of the sphere, no wiser than when they set out. As yet, we are more indebted to other nations than our own for a knowledge of the continent of America. A knowledge of the northwest coast is interesting to the civilized world at large, but to none more so than the United States, and I humbly think that the honor and interest of this Confederated Republic are more deeply involved in this subject of making discoveries in the northern seas than any other nations can be. Should a voyage of discovery be undertaken by our government, it is hoped that the northern coast of the continent of America will at least be examined. The undertaking would not only redound to the fame of our country and to that of the individual entrusted with the enterprise, but must be productive of immense advantage to our commerce and national prosperity, and carry our banner among a people with whom the civilized world as yet have had no intercourse. The prosecution of such an enterprise would be attended with no very considerable demands on the treasury. The employment of one or two of our ships of war now in commission for the object would cause little additional expense. But even admitting that a few thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, would be necessary, of what importance is it, when weighed against the magnitude of the object to be accomplished? Could our public vessels be better employed than in surveying our northwest coast and in discovery? Our naval officers would rejoice on seeing open to their view a new path to fame, independent of the acquisition to their nautical experience. Many of our brave and skillful navigators would be proud of an appointment in such an enterprise. Many naturalists and men of science would cheerfully, at their own expense if necessary, accompany such an expedition. And although we may not expect such an enterprise to be accomplished to the full extent of Captain Symmes's anticipations and those who believe in his doctrines, yet as Americans we cannot but wish that the theory, which has been first advanced by a fellow citizen, should be countenanced by our own government and tested by the citizens of our own country. Chapter 9. A few brief suggestions relative to the description, tonnage, and number of vessels necessary to be equipped for a voyage of discovery to the interior regions of the earth, the number of men necessary to be employed on board, articles necessary for the outfit, and the probable expense attending the same. Also as to the route most proper to be pursued to accomplish the object of the expedition. Captain Symmes, in his first circular published at St. Louis on the 10th day of April, 1818, asks an outfit of 100 brave companions, well equipped, to set out from Siberia in autumn, with reindeer and sleighs, to pass over the ice of the frozen sea. On being furnished with an outfit of this description, he engages to explore the concave regions and discover a warm, or at least a temperate country of fertile soil, well stocked with animals and vegetables, if not men, on reaching about 69 miles beyond latitude 82 degrees. The route intended to be pursued by Captain Symmes appears to be that of the reindeer, and the time of setting out the same season of the year in which, according to Professor Adams, the reindeer migrate from that coast north. In this route, it would be necessary to cross the verge, or region of most intense cold, with the greatest possible expedition, so as to reach an inner temperate climate in the shortest time. The concave regions could be partially explored during the winter, and the party return in the spring, and at the same time of the reindeer, to the mouth of the river Lena. The Russians have been making considerable exertions to explore the northern regions. Baron Wrangel made an attempt of this kind in the year 1821, and a second attempt was made in the year 1822 by traveling with sledges drawn by dogs, but probably owing to the party not having faith in the winding meridians about the verge of the polar opening, or being unacquainted with their direction according to the theory of concentric spheres, they were bewildered and kept traveling in the neighborhood of the verge, the region of greatest cold, instead of proceeding in a direct course towards the pole until they were finally obliged to return without accomplishing the object of the expedition. At the present time, August 1824, an expedition is fitting out in Russia at great expense under the auspices of that distinguished patron of science, Count Romanzoff, for the purpose of making discoveries in the northern regions, with the intention of exploring over land or on the ice as far as it may be found practicable. The celebrated Admiral Krusenstern is to exercise a general superintendence over the expedition, while the immediate command is to be conferred on some distinguished Russian officer. The continent of North America would, in my opinion, be a more suitable place for an exploring party to set out from than the coast of Siberia. A company of men well armed could travel over land and draw their provisions and baggage on hand sledges on the snow or ice, as Hearn did during his journey, with light canoes for the purpose of crossing rivers and lakes should such be found to obstruct their progress. In this manner, the party would soon cross the verge or barren grounds, as Hearn calls it, and arrive in that country of abundant game of which the Indians informed him. Hearn, according to his journal, reached nearly the 72nd degree of north latitude, and his general course is laid down as being northwestwardly from Fort Churchill to the mouth of Coppermine River, which he says disembogues itself into the northern sea, flowing in a northerly direction. Melanobi, the Indian chief, who served as Hearn's guide from Hudson's Bay, pointed out the mouth of Coppermine River as being in a northeastwardly direction from Fort Churchill and flowing in an eastwardly course. Subsequent discoveries have, I believe, determined Melanobi to be correct in this particular, as that river has been ascertained to empty into the waters of the Atlantic north of Repulse Bay, several hundred miles distant from where Hearn lays it down on his map. It is so laid down in the map accompanying Ross's voyage of discovery. How Hearn could be so much mistaken in the course he traveled as to lay it down at nearly a right angle from its true course is rather unaccountable. He must have been deceived by the winding meridians of the verge, which turned him to the right, when to have passed directly into the concave, he ought, on arriving at a certain point, to have proceeded west of north, then west, and finally southwest, which would probably have conducted him to that country, which the Indian represented as being far to the west or southwest, and so warm that there was never any frost. In this direction, an exploring party ought most probably to travel, first north until they come to the verge, where, if they are on the continent of America, the meridians begin to wind to the right, then gradually as they advanced, incline to the west, then true west, then south of west, and finally, when entirely beyond the apparent verge, to the southwest if not due south. In crossing the verge, the cold would no doubt be considerable, but cold in those regions, as measured by the thermometer, appears to us much greater than the feelings of those exposed to that temperature indicate. Hence it was, no doubt, that Parry's crew could hunt in winter when the medium was below zero, and the Russians set out on their expedition over the ice in 1821, when the cold was 32 degrees below zero, and this too accounts for Hearne's sleeping in the snow without fire, by only digging a hole and lying therein, with his sledge turned up to windward. It does not appear that he complained of excessive cold, though he traveled nearly all winter. The regions through which he passed, as well as that in which Ross and Parry were, are alleged to be the coldest of the earth, and that those men experienced as great a degree of cold as would be in passing the verge into the concave regions. But I am of opinion that the most practicable, the most expeditious, and the best mode of exploring the interior regions would be by sea and by way of the South Polar opening, crossing the verge at the low side in the Indian Ocean, where it is presumed the sea is always open and nearly free from ice. But as we are residents of the northern hemisphere, the nearness of the North Polar opening to us, and the more immediate advantages which would result to us from an intercourse with the countries within the concave to the north, would seem to point out that as the most proper direction to be pursued, though the difficulties to be encountered in passing the verge of the North Polar opening would doubtless be much greater than those of the south, the cold much severer, and the ice more compact and difficult to pass. However, notwithstanding all these difficulties, the object, I think, might be safely accomplished by sailing either east of Spitzbergen or between Spitzbergen and Greenland, where writers in whom confidence may be placed inform us that the sea is open all winter. The greatest difficulty to be apprehended would be the accumulation of drifting ice in the summer season, but in the winter that difficulty perhaps would not be presented as in the fall or commencement of winter. The ice would attach itself to one shore or the other and become permanent. The Russians who wintered on Spitzbergen say that the sea was open during the whole winter, quite across the north end of the island. Several sailors who were once left on an island near Spitzbergen lived there several years. Though destitute of almost every necessary of life, they were not only able to support the cold of the winters, but even to supply themselves with provisions and light in those dreary regions. They finally returned in health and safety to their native country and friends. This island is probably as cold as any spot that is known to our sphere. A vessel almost at any time in summer could sail to and remain at Spitzbergen, having the necessary conveniences on board to make the crew comfortable for 2 or 3 years. They could lie all winter at the north part of the island, and after being there long enough to become acquainted with the nature and changes in the sea to the north of them, they could take some favorable opportunity and reach the pole, if the earth be a globe, or the interior concave regions. The distance from the north of Spitzbergen to the pole is only 600 geographical miles. Another favorable direction for making the discovery is by Bering's Straits on the northwest coast of America. And an additional advantage which is presented by this direction is that if the vessel should be obstructed by or frozen in the ice, the party could proceed by land on the shore of America, which is supposed to communicate with the concave regions, a party remaining with the vessels till the others returned. In case an expedition of discovery should be fitted out for the purpose of making the attempt by either route, the safety of the party would require that 2 vessels should be equipped with rather more than an ordinary number of men, and with a double number of boats at least, some so light and portable as to be easily carried by men over ice or necks of land, should it become necessary. Vessels propelled by steam would be preferable to any other, as they could more easily avoid the floating ice in passing the verge, as also ascend rapid rivers in the interior should such be discovered, and it be found necessary to ascend them. The vessel should be equipped with masts, sails, and every part of rigging necessary for sailing, with a ballast of coal, which should not be used, or any other fuel for steam purposes, until they come within the neighborhood of the ice, through which, by pursuing a proper course, it is believed, they would in a few days pass and arrive at a more temperate climate, and a country where they would be abundantly supplied with both wood and provisions. Perhaps it would be advisable to take on board a small boat with a proportionate steam engine for the purpose of running up shallow rivers or along coasts to make more minute observations. But the most important matter of all to be observed, and that on which the success of the expedition must depend, would be a proper observance of the principles of the theory and a due attention to the winding meridians and curvatures of the parallels of latitude when the verge shall be crossed, and which will require the party to be continually varying their course as they proceed forward in accordance with the place at which the attempt shall be made. The expense of an expedition of this kind would not be very great, at least not considerable when compared with the magnitude of the object to be accomplished, though I have not made, nor do I consider myself adequate to make minute estimates on the subject. But I should conclude that a sum of $100,000 or $200,000 would be amply sufficient to defray all expenses attending such an expedition. Should an attempt be made by way of the South Polar opening, with vessels fitted out as for a whaling voyage, the expense would probably not be the 1/5 part of that sum, and were an expedition undertaken overland from some post high north on the continent of America, the expense must be still less. Chapter 10. A short biographical sketch of Captain Symmes, with some observations on the treatment which he has met with in the advancement of his theory. John Cleves Symmes, the author of the theory of concentric spheres, is the son of Timothy Symmes of the state of New Jersey, whose father's name was also Timothy, and who was the son of the Reverend Thomas Symmes of Bradford, who graduated at Harvard College in 1698. Mr. Eliot, publisher of the New England Biographical Dictionary at Boston in the year 1809, makes honorable mention of his name. Timothy Symmes, the grandfather of the subject of this sketch, had but 2 sons. The one, John Cleves Symmes, well known as the father and founder of the first settlements in the Miami country, and the other, Timothy, the father of our theorist, and from whom the present family of Symmes in the Miami country are descended. Captain Symmes is now about 46 years of age. He is of middle stature and tolerably proportioned, with scarcely anything in his exterior to characterize the secret operations of his mind, except an abstraction, which from attentive inspection is found seated on a slightly contracted brow, and the glances of a bright blue eye that often seems fixed on something beyond immediate surrounding objects. His head is round, and his face rather small and oval. His voice is somewhat nasal, and he speaks hesitatingly and with apparent labor. His manners are plain and remarkable for native simplicity. He is a native of the state of New Jersey. During the early part of his life, he received what was then considered a common English education, which in after life he improved by having access to tolerably well-selected libraries, and being endued by nature with an insatiable desire for knowledge of all kinds, he thus had, during the greater part of his life, ample opportunities to indulge it. In the year 1802, and at the age of about 22 years, Mr. Symmes entered the Army of the United States in the office of ensign, from which he afterwards rose to that of captain. He continued in service until after the close of the late war with Great Britain. While attached to the army, he was universally esteemed a brave soldier and a zealous and faithful officer. He was in the memorable Battle of Bridgewater, and was senior captain in the regiment to which he belonged. The company under his immediate command that day discharged 70 rounds of cartridges and repelled 3 desperate charges of the bayonet. Afterwards, in the sortie from Fort Erie, Captain Symmes with his command captured the enemy's battery No. 2, and with his own hand spiked the cannon it contained. Yet owing to the want of correct information or from some other cause, the honor and the reward of this achievement were alike bestowed upon others, and it is a fact not less to be regretted that the official report of the Battle of Bridgewater has represented the regiment to which Captain Symmes was attached as almost the only one that retreated at Lundy's Lane, when in truth it was nearly the only one which uniformly maintained the positions it was ordered to maintain throughout the action. Captain Symmes has since, however, substantiated the correctness of its conduct by obtaining the necessary acknowledgments, some of the particulars of which were communicated to the Historical Society of New York and published in the newspapers of the day. The truth of this statement has also been confirmed to me by a respectable officer who was in the action and witnessed the occurrence. During the period of about 3 years, immediately after the close of the war, and after Captain Symmes had left the army, he was engaged in the difficult and laborious task of furnishing supplies to the troops stationed on the upper Mississippi. How he succeeded in this business, I am not informed, but I conclude from his present circumstances that he could not have realized any very considerable pecuniary advantage from the enterprise. Since that time he has resided at Newport, Kentucky, devoting almost exclusively the whole of his time and attention to the investigation and perfection of his favorite theory of concentric spheres. In a short circular dated at St. Louis in 1818, Captain Symmes first promulgated the fundamental principles of his theory to the world. He addressed a copy to every learned institution and to every considerable town and village, as well as distinguished individuals of which he could gain any intelligence, throughout the United States and to several learned societies in Europe. The reception this circular met with was that of ridicule, it being looked upon as the production of a distempered imagination or the ravings of partial insanity. Indeed, it became a fruitful source of jest and levity to publishers of the public prints of the day generally all over the Union. The Academy of Sciences in Paris, before which it was laid by Count Volney, decided that it was unworthy of their consideration, and the editor of the London Morning Chronicle could not be induced to credit the statements of respectable men who declared that Symmes was not a madman. But in this, his fate is not peculiar. The experience of the world has taught us that the authors of new doctrines have mostly shared a similar lot. An excellent contemporary writer has remarked that the fate of many projectors have been so melancholy that it requires at this day the daring spirit and the enthusiasm which are naturally allied to genius in any man to announce himself as the inventor of anything new and extraordinary. The patience and perseverance of a Galileo and the adventurous spirit of a Fulton are necessary to him who would benefit his species by the results of original plans and forms, or that of new combinations of old and tried ones. Hence we cannot but respect and admire the man who, regardless of the hard fate of so many who have trod before him in the thorny path of improvement, still has the fortitude and philosophy of mind to spend years in toil and study, to labor by day with persevering industry, and trim the midnight lamp with the vigilance ascribed to the ancient Vestals, in bringing to perfection an idea from which he hopes to reap fame and benefit to himself, and to reflect credit at the same time on the genius of his country. Captain Symmes published 2 other numbers at St. Louis in the year 1818. The one went to prove by geometrical principles that matter must necessarily form itself into concentric spheres, and the other treated of geological principles. His 2 next numbers, marked 4 and 5, the one treating of the original formation of the Allegheny Mountains, and the other claiming the discovery of open poles, I have never had an opportunity of seeing. His 6th number appeared dated at Cincinnati in January 1819, which contains a number of items and principles that he proposes treating of in subsequent numbers. His 7th number, entitled Arctic Memoir, is dated at Cincinnati in February 1819, and another number entitled Light Between the Spheres, dated at Cincinnati in August 1819, was published in the National Intelligencer. From that time to the present, numerous pieces from the pen of Captain Symmes have appeared in different newspapers, but the most prominent and grand doctrines on which his theory is based are contained in the papers above enumerated. Independent of his written publications, he has delivered a number of lectures on the theory, first at Cincinnati in 1820, and afterwards at Lexington and Frankfort in Kentucky, and at Hamilton and Zanesville in the state of Ohio. Several of these lectures I had the pleasure of hearing, and the respectable number of auditors, and the profound stillness that reigned, evinced in the strongest manner the interest felt by all present in the subject. In addition to the various facts and phenomena to which he adverts in support of his positions, he delineates in his lectures upon a wooden sphere, constructed on the principles of his theory, the cause of the winding meridians, the icy hoop or verge, and the course which ought to be pursued to reach the interior regions, with the confidence of mathematical certainty. Captain Symmes's want of a classical education and philosophic attainments perhaps unfits him for the office of a lecturer, but his arguments being presented in confused array and clothed in homely phraseology can furnish no objection to the soundness of his doctrines. The imperfection of his style and the inelegance of his manner may be deplored, but certainly constitute no proof of the inadequacy of his reasoning or the absurdity of his deductions. There is scarcely a single individual with whom I have conversed who does not confess that if the facts which he adduces and the arguments he uses were handled by an able orator, they would produce a powerful effect. In short, those who attend to his lectures, without regarding his peculiarities of style and manner, who reflect alone on their substantial parts, without regarding the want of eloquence in the lecturer, who presume to think for themselves and are able to comprehend the naked facts and unadorned arguments which he advances, will not fail to discover in them many particulars well worthy of their consideration, and many arguments calculated to stagger their faith in preconceived opinions. In the year 1822, Captain Symmes petitioned the Congress of the United States, setting forth in the first place his belief of the existence of a habitable and accessible concave to this globe, his desire to embark on a voyage of discovery to one or other of the polar regions, his belief in the great profit and honor his country would derive from such discovery, and prayed that Congress would equip and fit out for the expedition 2 vessels of 250 or 300 tons burthen, and grant such other aid as government might deem necessary to promote the object. This petition was presented in the Senate by Colonel Richard M. Johnston, a member from Kentucky, on the 7th day of March, 1822, when a motion to refer it to the Committee of Foreign Relations having failed, after a few remarks it was laid on the table, ayes 25. In December 1823, he forwarded similar petitions to both houses of Congress, which met with a similar fate. In January 1824, he petitioned the General Assembly of the state of Ohio, praying that body to pass a resolution approbatory of his theory, and to recommend him to Congress for an outfit suitable to the enterprise. This memorial was presented by Micajah T. Williams, and on motion the further consideration thereof was indefinitely postponed. That Captain Symmes is a high-minded, honorable man is attested by all who know him. He has devised a theory whereby to account for various singular and interesting phenomena, and more satisfactorily to explain a great variety of acknowledged facts. He argues from the effect to the cause in many of his positions, and with great perspicuity, and the circumstance that few of the learned have yet attempted to show that his principles are founded in absurdity should at least entitle him to the respect, and his theory to the attention of every candid man. Notwithstanding he has been buffeted by the ridicule and sarcasm of an opposing world for 7 years, under great pecuniary embarrassments, he still labors with unshaken faith and unbroken perseverance, with a willingness at any time to test the truth of his speculations amid the icy mountains of the polar seas. Already has he passed the meridian of life, and should he be called from time without establishing his theory by actual discovery, the science he has embodied, and the facts he has collected and arranged in support of it, together with his undeviating and indefatigable industry, in the face of the world's dread laugh, which scarce the firm philosopher can scorn, will bear a testimonial to his talents and worth that the best of his species will ever delight to acknowledge. And though he may not have accounted for every particular, or brought forward every argument that might possibly be advanced in support of his positions, he has nevertheless collected a greater number of peculiarly interesting facts and embodied a stronger phalanx of proof than could well have been expected on a subject so new and in the hands of the original discoverer. If hereafter it should be ascertained that Symmes's theory of the earth is true, impartial posterity will not withhold the honor and fame due to the name of the discoverer. It is hoped, however, that the present age will not so far forfeit to posterity the high character it now sustains in scientific discovery as to remain deaf to his solicitations, but that the citizens of our own country in particular, if not the whole world, will unite in testing the truth of his principles and in doing justice to the merits of this extraordinary man. And with that, we have reached the end of this extraordinary book, Symmes's theory of concentric spheres, demonstrating that the earth is hollow, habitable within, and widely open about the poles. Despite the fact that this theory fails completely, what an interesting look at how someone tries to make sense of the world. I hope you enjoyed that. And just a note for our Patreon supporters. As always, now that we've reached the end of the book, I'll be stitching together all the readings into one long recording for those nights when something extra long is just the thing for sleep. If you'd like to read this fascinating work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.